Foreign Minister Cho visits Beijing for talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang at a time when tensions are high on the Korean peninsula and around the world. The dispute between the government and doctors is further heating up over the issue of how the authorities came up with the number of new students for its medical school quota expansion plan, with the case being taken to court. The White House says it has discussed with Israel ways to eliminate Hamas in Rafah without resorting to a ground invasion. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, has reaffirmed his will to continue fighting. It's May 13th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. We start this evening over in Beijing, where South Korean Foreign Minister Cho is currently visiting. His conversation with his Chinese counterpart Wang comes at a critical time, seeking new momentum in Korea-China relations while tensions are high on the Korean peninsula and around the world. Our correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
Foreign Minister Cho expressed his hopes for better ties with China before leaving for Beijing on Monday morning.
This is an important first step in creating new momentum in South Korea-China relations. It's an important opportunity to revitalize strategic communication between the two countries amid a tough geopolitical environment. I hope to discuss ways to promote bilateral relations and issues on the Korean Peninsula and other regional and global matters.
He said he hopes to have an honest and deep conversation with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, whom he's meeting on Monday evening, Korea Standard Time. When asked if he would raise the issue of China's forced repatriation of North Korean defectors, Minister Cho responded as follows.
The issue is an important concern of our government, so of course I will raise it and listen to what China has to say.
Other key issues also were related to North Korea.
North Korea's nuclear issue is our biggest security concern. It is also an issue that China has to play an important role in, so it will definitely be discussed as one of the key issues.
Military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang will also be discussed in the hopes of Beijing's constructive role in this matter. When asked about Beijing possibly raising issues regarding South Korea's possible joining of AUKUS, a security partnership between Australia, the UK and the US, or the strengthening ties between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo, the minister said he would make the government's position clear based on principles. But he didn't forget to stress that he will focus on further developing Seoul-Beijing ties in areas with high potential. Details of the possible trilateral summit between Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo later this month will also likely be discussed. This is the first time in 6.5 years for a South Korean foreign minister to visit Beijing. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
As South Korea's online platform giant Naver has been facing pressure from the Japanese government to sell its shares in Line Yahoo, the company behind Japan's popular messaging app Line, criticism has emerged. The presidential office, for its part, has vowed to take all possible measures for the interests of the Korean firm. Moon Hye-ryun explains.
The South Korean government has spoken up to support Naver as it faces foreign pressure to sell its shares in Line Yahoo. Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Sung Tae-eun briefed reporters on Monday afternoon about the government's current stance and future plans to assist Naver with the issue.
The government's response has so far reflected Naver's position as much as possible and will continue to support Naver with any future developments.
He stated that the government has been in communication with both Naver and the Japanese government and is waiting for the firm to make its stance clear to provide as much support as possible. Last Friday, Naver released an official statement saying that it was currently undergoing discussions with SoftBank to obtain the best result possible for the company, and the possibility of selling its shares was on the table. After a data leak from the messaging app Line last year, the Japanese government directed its operator in March to review its capital relationship with Naver to prevent it from happening again. Line Yahoo is mostly owned by A Holdings, which is a joint venture with equal stakes between South Korea's Naver and Japan's SoftBank, the firm that has been leveraging Tokyo's pressure to reduce Naver's control by slashing the South Korean firm's equity. Seoul has been called on to respond to the situation because Naver lacks communication channels with the Japanese government, whose moves have widely faced criticism as Naver is responsible for most of Line's technology. Before the briefing, the Ministry of Science and ICT stated last Friday that it regrets the pressure placed on Naver by Tokyo and will respond firmly and forcefully to any discriminatory action against South Korean firms. It also pledged support for measures to strengthen information security at the company to address the user information leaks, should the firm wish to continue holding its stake in Line Yahoo. But on Monday, the firm's union spoke out against Naver's possible divestment of its stake in Line Yahoo, adding that the firm needs to protect the technology and know-how of its workers that have gone into building Line. 문혜련, Arirang News.
President Yoon has ordered the creation of a senior secretary role to help tackle the nation's low birth rate. That's according to presidential spokesperson Kim Soo-kyung on Monday, following the president's weekly meeting with his senior secretaries. An official added that the top office will be reaching out to experts and scholars in the field to create the role as soon as possible, calling the situation one of the biggest problems that affects the sustainability of the nation. This also comes as President Yoon announced that he will push for a new ministry to tackle the issue, with the minister also holding the Deputy Prime Minister for Social Affairs role. According to Statistics Korea, the country's total fertility rate in the fourth quarter of 2023 was 0.65. The new rival floor leaders of the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea held an official meet and greet at the National Assembly on Monday. The PPP's Chu Kyung-ho visited Park Chan-dae of the DP at his office for a closed discussion lasting around 10 minutes. While no official announcements were made, they acknowledged the importance of active communication between the political parties in achieving legislative goals, sharing their desire to meet every week. This was the first meeting between them, both soon-to-be third-term lawmakers elected to the floor leader position earlier this month. The dispute between the government and doctors is further heating up over the issue of how the authorities came up with the number of new students for its medical school quota expansion plan, with the case being taken to court. An Sung-jin has the latest.
With the Seoul High Court set to rule this week on whether the medical school quota has to be enforced, the medical community disclosed to the public on Monday the evidence submitted by the government to the court. The government last week submitted approximately 50 items of documented evidence to support its decision to increase the quota. This included research reports which were used as a basis for the quota number, as well as meeting records from the Medical School Quota Allocation Committee. The medical community is arguing that the meeting to make the decision was too brief, lasting just an hour, and was nothing more than a formal act to confirm the number brought by the government. This was further elaborated during a press conference held on Monday afternoon, as the chairman of the Medical Professor Association of Korea, Kim Chang-soo, expressed his shock as there were no more than 3 reports used to back the government's position. The Medical Professor Association of Korea and the Korean Academy of Medical Sciences argue that after evaluating the documented evidence, there is not enough evidence to support the medical school quota expansion to 2,000. However, the government reiterates that the number was finalized after various discussions. The Prime Minister elaborated on this during a Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters meeting on Monday.
Revealing evidence is interfering with a fair trial to pressure the judiciary by swaying the public opinion. The government decided to increase the quota number based on research that there would be a shortage of nearly 10,000 doctors in 2035.
This comes as medical students, professors, and trainee doctors filed an application with the Seoul High Court to suspend the enforcement of the quota expansion. After reviewing the submitted materials, the Seoul High Court will make its decision by the 17th. This decision will be pivotal in the conflict between the medical school and the government. If the application is accepted, it will put the brakes on the increase for next year. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Turning to the war in the Middle East, the White House says it is discussing with Israel strategies to eliminate Hamas in Rafah without initiating a large-scale ground invasion. This development follows Prime Minister Netanyahu's reaffirmation of Israel's commitment to its ongoing military effort. Shin Se-byuk reports.
The United States and Israel are exploring strategies to eliminate Hamas in Rafah without resorting to a large-scale ground invasion. According to the White House, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had a phone conversation on Sunday with Israeli National Security Advisor Chaki Hanegbi, discussing alternative actions to defeat Hamas throughout Gaza. Sullivan reiterated President Joe Biden's long-standing concerns about a potential ground invasion that could result in massive civilian casualties. Hanegbi, in response, gave his assurances that Israel is taking U.S. concerns into account. The talks came following Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's video message released on Sunday, reaffirming Israel's commitment to continue to fight.
Keep going until victory, and that's how we will do it. The spirit of the people, with God's help, will continue to lift us up in the faithful challenges that are still ahead of us and that we had in our 76 years of independence.
Speaking at a Yad Labanim ceremony for fallen soldiers held in Jerusalem, Netanyahu said that they have completed about half of the war, but also said they are committed to completing this sacred task as it is the only way to defeat Hamas. On the same day, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken shared his thoughts on a recent report by the State Department on Israel's use of weapons sent by the U.S. after Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th.
We don't have double standards. We treat Israel, one of our closest allies and partners, just as we would treat any other country, including in assessing something like international humanitarian law and its compliance with that law.
While the report, which was submitted to Congress last Friday, indicated that Israel may have violated international humanitarian law, Blinken highlighted the difficulty of coming to that conclusion during wartime. He also stressed the Biden administration's stance that the U.S. would not support Israel and send weapons if Israel decides to go ahead with a full-scale invasion of Rafah. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
K-pop's expanding popularity is not a new thing, but it is indeed notable to see how more and more K-pop artists are being invited to major music festivals around the world. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us who is going where and why it is significant.
More and more K-pop artists are being invited to global music festivals abroad. Of course, it is not surprising to see major festivals asking K-pop acts to shine at the show, and we are indeed seeing more debuting at large-scale stadiums and festivals. Leading such a trend is 17, the 13-member act that is joining the lineup for this year's Glastonbury Festival in the UK. The 5-day festival is set to take place from June 26th to 30th, and 17 is booked for Glastonbury's Pyramid Stage, a first for a K-pop act in the festival's 50-year history. Lollapalooza Berlin is where K-pop fans can also enjoy a 17 performance as well, as the boy band has been invited to headline the festival slated for early September. 17 is not the only K-pop act that is having a chance to headline major music festivals. Stray Kids 2 will headline on Lollapalooza, this time in Chicago in August, for the second straight year after performing at Lollapalooza Paris last July, another first for a K-pop artist. For the Chicago version, K-pop girl groups IVE and Vicha are also invited to perform. Japan is not an exception. Summer Sonic in August is set to feature the largest number of K-pop acts in the Japanese music festival's history, with the lineup including IVE, NCT Dream, singer-songwriter duo Akmu, Zero Base One. Adding to that, TWICE and 17 are expected to hold a concert at Nissan Stadium, Japan's largest stadium with 75,000 seats, for the first time since TVXQ's concert there. An expert says such performances at music festivals can upgrade K-pop acts' live performance skills and their brands.
In South Korea, idols do more broadcast activities than concerts most of the time. But by headlining such global music festivals, they can upgrade themselves to become live performance artists on the global stage, adding more value to their own brands.
Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
A space-out competition has taken place here in the capital, challenging participants to space out for 90 minutes in the most relaxed manner to claim victory. Our Yoon explains what this event is all about.
Do you ever want to just space out and do nothing for a while? Well, there is a place where people gather to do that and maybe even win a trophy. Seoul City government hosted the 10th Space Out competition on Sunday at the Banpo Hangang Park.
I wanted to apply for this competition as this competition is very interesting to me. It underlines the importance of taking time for ourselves and relax and meditation.
This year, more than 2,700 teams applied to participate in the competition, and 80 individuals or teams of up to 3 members were selected. Participants spanning from celebrities to athletes were there to express their individuality, adding to the enjoyment of the competition.
We are bakers, so it's really hot in front of the oven. I found myself wanting to empty my mind.
After working so hard, I feel confident about spacing out.
As I've entered my 60s, I wanted to try new things and explore a variety of experiences. I don't necessarily have ambitions of winning first place. Instead, I'm cherishing it as a wonderful experience.
And with the bell ring to start the competition, each participant settled into their own comfortable state of spacing out. Surprisingly, the presence of a crowd didn't seem to disrupt their peaceful state of mind.
To win, participants need to maintain a blank state by not moving or even thinking about anything for 90 minutes. Wristband heart rate monitors will check every 15 minutes.
Visual artist Upsiang is the organizer of the event. She says the selection process for participants prioritizes the reasons for the application, while also wishing to bring together a diverse group of people in terms of age, gender, and occupation.
My wish is that everyone can collectively experience a moment of true relaxation during this unique occasion.
While some participants chose to withdraw midway, others demonstrated remarkable endurance. After the 90-minute space-out session, the winner was determined based on 2 factors. Firstly, participants' heart rate graphs were analyzed to measure relaxation levels. And secondly, through on-site voting by onlookers, who selected their favorite participant based on the stories that led them to apply. In the end, Kwon So-ah, a freelance broadcaster who previously worked as a reporter at Arirang, took the trophy.
I space out often, but it feels like my heart rate is around 150 beats per minute right now.
Even without a cash prize, people seem to enjoy the significance and meaning imparted by the event, because we all need to find moments of relaxation and peace amidst the hustle and bustle of our busy lives. Yoon, Arirang News.
Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us in the studio is our sports editor, Paul Need. Hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Let's first start with baseball. Some unfortunate news for 2 Korean stars in MLB.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Injuries to both Lee Jong-hoo and Kim Ha-sung. Lee Jong-hoo dislocated his left shoulder on Sunday in the San Francisco Giants' eventual 6-5 home win over the Cincinnati Reds. He hit the outfield fence while trying to make a catch in the first inning. He'd missed the previous 3 games with a foot injury as well, and is now going to be on the sidelines for an extended period. Meanwhile, also on Sunday, Kim Ha-sung of the San Diego Padres appeared to hurt his hand when it was struck by a 94-mile-an-hour fastball in an eventual 4-0 win over the LA Dodgers. He left the field of play and later had an X-ray, but nothing was found to be broken.
And let's take a look at golf now. A solid showing for An Byung-hun.
Yes, well, he finished third at the Wells Fargo Championship in Charlotte, North Carolina on Sunday and finished 9 under par, and a final round score of 5 under 66 helped him stay ahead of fellow South Korean Im Sung-jae, who finished in 4th place. An hit 7 birdies and 2 bogeys to earn his best ever score at the Wells Fargo. Also, it was his 5th top 10 finish of the season and 2nd in as many weeks after the Barron Nelson last week. Rory McIlroy went on to win, finishing at 17 under for his 26th career PGA Tour title and his 4th at Wells Fargo.
And moving on to football now, a huge win for Lee Jae-sung's club in Germany. What can you tell us?
Yes, huge win, and with Lee Jae-sung playing a huge role in that win as well. Now, Mainz on Sunday beat Champions League finalist Borussia Dortmund 3-0, with Lee Jae-sung scoring 2 goals in 4 minutes. The first came with 19 minutes play to make it 2-0, cutting out an attempted pass by the Dortmund goalkeeper before sending the ball into an unguarded net. The second came on 23 minutes, poking the ball into the bottom corner from inside the box. He has 6 goals and 4 assists in 28 appearances for Mainz this season. The win moves them outside the relegation zone, 2 points clear of Union Berlin with 1 game still to play. Mainz play Wolfsburg on the final day, May the 18th, with their destiny now in their own hands.
And finally, to athletics, Woo Sang-hyuk seems to be in good form with the Olympics just around the corner.
Yes, he does. On Friday, he finished 2nd in an invitational event in Qatar. He cleared 2.31 meters, as did Mutaz Essa Barshim, but Woo had to settle for silver as his Qatari rival cleared the same distance in 1 attempt. Woo needed to have 3 attempts. The event was actually hosted by Barshim, the reigning Olympic gold medal winner. Woo Sang-hyuk, who is the world indoor champion, now has his sights set on becoming the first South Korean high jumper to win an Olympic medal. He finished 4th in Tokyo in 2021.
Thank you, Paul. I'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you.
Spring rain and yellow dust have passed and blue skies came around today. Temperatures have also risen in the spring sunshine. This warm weather will continue until tomorrow. In the middle of the day, the sun will be stronger nationwide than it was today. You can continue to dress lightly during the day. However, since there are huge temperature gaps nationwide, please bring some outerwear on your way to work in the morning. In eastern areas of Gangwon province, the atmosphere is very dry. A dry weather advisory has been issued in this area, and the atmosphere will gradually dry up in other eastern regions as well. The wind is also blowing somewhat strongly, so there is a high risk of fires such as wildfires. Please take extra precautions. Tomorrow, Seoul will start off at 13 degrees Celsius. Highs in Seoul will reach 25. Chuncheon, Daejeon, and Gwangju, 26 degrees. More rain is expected in the center parts of the country and Gyeongsang-Bukdo province on Wednesday. Temperatures will drop as it rains with strong winds. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Completely new. But something anyone can relate with. Flawlessly made. And tears that go with it. K-drama. Korea is coming at you with another story to tell. Children's. Laughter. Hope. Dream. K-animation belongs in them. Interesting and valuable story that transcends between everyday life and dream. Surprising spectacle where imagination becomes real. An array of subjects catering from infants to adolescents. 4-hour story to reach all corners of the world. K-animation makes healthy laughter for children.
어느 날 바닷가에 갔더니 제가 촬영했던 화장품 케이스들이 떠내려왔더라고요. 그거를 보고 많은 생각을 했어요. 그 어마어마한 양의 쓰레기는 거의 상상을 할 수 없을 정도로 진짜 경이로울 정도로 많습니다. 그런 것들이 이제 너무 이질적으로 보였죠. 그 식물들이 거기서 자라고 싶어서 자란 건 아니거든요. 우리가 버린 쓰레기에서 자란 이 식물들도 우리가 만든 환경인데 어떻게 보면 우리가 그 운명에 대해서 관여를 한 거거든요. 우리가 만든 이 환경에 대해서는 인간이 이거를 관여를 해야 된다고 묻지 않아요. 내가 이렇게 한다고 해서 이게 달라지는 건 아니거든요, 세상이. 세상에 당신들이 썼던 이런 물건들에서 이 자라는 식물에 대해서 좀 고민을 해봐라. 자연에 들어가서 주변을 잠깐만 관심 있게 둘러보시면 구석구석에 엄청난 쓰레기들이 많습니다. 당신이 하나 주운 게 수천 마리의 종을 생명을 살릴 수가 있습니다. 나는 쓰레기 더미에서 생명을 발견하는 그리너다.
자, 젓갈이요, 젓갈 사요. 네, 맛보세요. 자, 오징어, 낙지, 창란 다 맛있어요. 자, 드셔보세요. 10시까지 가요. 네, 어서오세요. 반찬 사러 오세요. 반찬 맛있어요. 언니, 이걸로 하나 드릴까요? 이걸로? 다 맛있어요. 네, 13,000원. 네, 예, 안녕히 가세요. 예, 어서오세요. 자, 반찬 사세요, 반찬. 자, 저녁에 밑반찬으로 드세요. 반찬이 맛있어요. 예, 안녕히 가세요. 예, 예.
Thanks for joining us. You've tuned into Arirang's Within the Frame. I'm Hangang in Seoul. There's a renowned historian from the U.S. who is more Korean than you can ever imagine. When asked how old he is, his answer may puzzle you as he goes by Korea's traditional calendar cycle. His favorite food is galeng, a short name for a blend of popular Korean dishes, galbi and naengmyeon, and he's less forgiving about Japan's wartime atrocities than many Koreans. Can you guess who this remarkable scholar is? Well, without further ado, let's now bring in Mark Peterson, Professor Emeritus of Korean Studies at Brigham Young University, to hear about his extraordinary life stories and his thoughts on Korea's various historical issues. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're often called the evangelist of Korean history. What do you think about that nickname?
That's fine. That's fine. I guess I am. I like Korea. I like a lot of things about Korea, and as I talk about it, it sounds like I'm being an evangelist sometimes. Yeah, I suppose that's okay.
Well, your deep connection to Korean history and culture, I'm sure has touched the hearts of many here in Korea, and it's certainly something that can't be seen in an average historian. I'm sure you've been asked this question 1,000 times, but what first brought you to Korea and what motivated you to study Korean history?
Yeah, those are two different things, actually. I first came as a missionary in 1965. And then after that mission service was over, it was a 2.5-year period, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, you know. what is this thing called Korea that I encountered, and what was it? And I just needed to know more about it. So I decided to major in Asian studies, and specifically Korean studies, to see if I could figure out what this was. Yeah.
So, because Korea was so new to you.
So new, so different.
So different.
Yeah, I mean, it was just so different from anything I'd experienced before. And I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand why Koreans were so committed to family, and why they're so committed to education, and why they're so motivated to, in effect, prove themselves. Because when I first came in 1965, Korea was desperately poor. Desperately poor. The per capita income was as low as any other country in the world. It was $125 per year per capita income. So, but still, people didn't act like they were poor. And as I thought about it, I think they were acting like they've been through a temporary maelstrom, you know, of the Japanese occupation and the Korean War. And all these things are temporary. The real Korea is yet to come out. And that's what I knew would come out from 1965. And the real Korea, you can see around us today. It's marvelous. Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that as we move on. From my understanding, you adopted 2 daughters also here in Korea. Can you tell us more about this extraordinary decision and also the remarkable journey you had with them?
It is rather remarkable. The 2 girls, we had hoped to have children naturally, and we'd had 2 natural failures, miscarriages. And so we'd hoped that, you know, we'd have a child along the way. Finally, I was 43 when I decided I had to do something if we were going to have children. And to us, it was very important to have children, which is another topic. We can talk about the Korean problem of not having children today. Right. But we wanted to have children. We were lucky to adopt the first girl. And then we were even luckier to be able to adopt the second girl. 2 little girls. They're both married. They both married American boys who I just love as my sons-in-law. And they both have 2 children, a son and a daughter, and a son and a daughter. Number 1 is through. Number 2 wants to have 2 or 3 more children.
Well, I'm sure they must be adorable. Miscarriages, they're disheartening to say the least, but I'm so glad that the adoption worked out so
It worked out very well.
beautifully.
We love those kids. We could not love them more. We could not love them more, you know, if they were naturally born or whatever. You know, we just love them to pieces, and we're a family.
You've taught Korean history at Brigham Young University for 35 years.
Yes.
Were there any particular areas or aspects or specific periods of Korean history that you placed great emphasis on throughout your courses?
Yes. In the courses, you have to teach the broad spectrum. But in my research, I found myself falling into a late 17th century pit. That's where I ended up spending most of my time. And what I discovered was daughters had equal inheritances with sons up until the late 17th century. And then things started to change. And Korea became what we call patrilineal, or male-dominated, from the late 17th century onward. And a lot of people think that Confucianism is the issue, but Confucianism had been in Korea for 1,200 years already. And it's not really Confucianism, it's Confucian symbiosis with the patrilineal family organization, which meant daughters are disinherited, daughters are no longer hosting ceremonies. Daughters used to host ceremonies, the Korean word is Yoon, in rotation, taking their term, equal with the sons. And it used to be that daughters would host the marriage as well as the sons host the marriage. It would all depend whether the Korean is 시집 가다 or 장가 가다. After this 17th century, Koreans all 시집 가다, which meant the girl went to the boy's house to live. But before that time, it was just as common for the boy to go to the girl's house. In fact, a lot of famous Koreans, Yulgo Senseng, who's on the 5001 note, was born in his mother's house. And so there was a balance of marriage places before the late 17th century. After the late 17th century, daughters are disinherited. They can no longer participate in ceremonies. You had to have a son. If you didn't have one, you'd adopt from within the lineage, within the same bloodline. And what are the other ones? There are several other things of the patrilineal development that changed Korea forever from that time forward.
Well, equal inheritance among females and males in the 17th century. Who knew? It looks like you know more about Korean history than many Koreans. I heard that in the 90s, you've also analyzed and corrected the errors in parts of U.S. history textbooks.
A friend of mine at the Ministry of Culture and Information asked me to do a research project that led me into a project of working with the Korea Society in New York and the Korean Academy of Korean Studies in Korea, where beginning in the 90s, for 20 years, I was involved in this project. And what it was bringing American scholars who were involved in the textbooks, sometimes university professors, sometimes the editor at the textbook. These people would bring to Korea 10, 15 at a time and have a seminar and take them around and show them different places in Korea. The issue was twofold. One was correcting mistakes, and there were mistakes that would creep in. But more than the mistakes was the volume, the content. Korea geographically is trapped between Japan and China. Academically, they're trapped between Japan and China. And so in the textbook, in world history, oh, we have to do China. Oh, we have to do Japan.
That's usually
and
how it
left
goes,
over.
Right?
Yeah, and so our job was try to get Korea into its place, to get more content about Korea. And I worked on that project for every summer for over 20 years.
So have you witnessed some improvement over the years?
Yes, we've seen a radical improvement. You know, there were some textbooks. I did a massive survey, 82 American textbooks that touched on Korea, and some of them had no mention of Korea. And some of them had 1 page on Korea. And the most we found initially was 5, 6 pages. Now we have books that have 17, 20, 25 pages on Korea. So in a world history context, 20 pages doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to 190 countries in the world, it's an improvement.
That is a significant change, but what were some of the most common errors found in U.S. history textbooks about Korea?
It was always influence from Japan. If a textbook editor chose a Japanese writer, a Japanese historian, the Korean context was a little bit biased. For example, kaya was always a problem because Japan likes to claim ownership of kaya. They called it mimana, is the Japanese word for kaya. And if you read a textbook that says, well, in ancient Korea there was a state called mimana, the alarms go off. No, that's not right. That's a Japanese interpretation. So most of the mistakes and errors we found in the textbooks were things that crept out of a Japanese context.
And speaking of Japan, your strong remarks about Japan's wartime atrocities has grabbed media attention recently. You said that you find it hard to forgive Japan's past wrongdoings, even more so than many Koreans. Can you elaborate?
Maybe more so than Koreans. I don't know. Koreans are very forgiving, and that's a wonderful thing. But as a historian, I'm living this atrocity thing. And so it's more it's more clear in my mind as I look at it. I got into a brouhaha with a Harvard law professor. I don't know if you know about this. His name was Mark Ramsayer.
Oh, he's famous in Korea, isn't he?
Infamous, I say. Yeah, he wrote an article justifying the use of comfort women during the war. And his article was full of problems. And one of my students called me on the phone. Did you see this? And I hadn't seen it. You've got to write a response. He's from Harvard. You're from Harvard. You've got to represent Harvard and do this. So I wrote a critique of his essay. And it was really quite severe because the mistake he made, as I see it, was he was saying that the comfort women were all contracted. They all made money. They all volunteered to do this to make money. and they all had the contract. Well, I said, show me a contract. If there were thousands of these women and there were 2 contracts, there has to be 2 contracts by definition. There has to be 2 copies, one by the agent, one by the agency. And, you know, you have to have a copy of this. I said, show me a contract. Show me one. He didn't have one to show. And he's talking about women who, at this time period, were probably lower socioeconomic class. In the Japanese period, probably did not read Japanese, and they were expected to sign a contract. It's nonsense. So I wrote a critique about this, and several other people. The problem is, around the world, this essay, this research paper, had no credential, no believability. But he wasn't writing it for the world. He was writing it for Japan. And he was writing it for certain people in Japan that like to think of it this way, and he reinforced their point of view, although the article was completely full of errors. Yeah. So yeah, I got into that brouhaha.
Well, his argument outraged many here in Korea, but in contrast, you're staunchly vocal about Korea's many other historical issues as well, displaying a level of conviction that surpasses many Koreans, and that's truly inspiring and fascinating. You're now a passionate YouTuber of your channel named The Frog Outside the Well.
Yes.
What does this interesting title imply?
Well, you know, Americans and Westerners don't know what it is. They don't understand why it's a frog outside the well. But Koreans and Japanese and Chinese know there's a saying of the frog in the well. And what you say to someone if they're not looking at the big picture, if they've got a narrow view of something, oh, you're like a frog in the well. You're not looking at it. So I'm saying I'm the frog outside the well, meaning I'm looking at a broader perspective of Korea as an outsider. And frankly, I wasn't sure if the title was going to go over well, because it's quite arrogant to say I'm the frog outside the well. And I know and you don't know, but people don't take it that way. They take it as an outsider looking at Korea. And the things that I say in my YouTube channel are things that people know already. I don't reveal any new history, but I have a different perspective on it. I say, hey, well, you can look at it this way. And the biggest thing that I look at differently in Korean history is I see Korean history as greatly peaceful. Although the common narrative you hear is about all of the wars and the turmoil. The 20th century in Korea was awful, absolutely awful for the 20th century. But that's not the whole history. And what happens is you tend to look at history from the most immediate thing. So many people tend to look at the horrors and the atrocities of the 20th century as the whole story. And it's absolutely not. Korea has the longest dynasties in the world. They have smooth transitions between dynasties. Korea really has had few invasions, which is counter to what most people will tell you. And Korea has never invaded another country. By cross-cultural comparison, I think I can make these arguments. There are several other things. The Amno River, the Yalu River, is a 1,000-year border. It's the longest border in the history of the world. No other country has a border that's lasted for 1,000 years. And so there are a lot of other things that argue for a peaceful interpretation of Korean history.
Well, you know, when we talk about Korean history, we mostly talk about the Korean War and Japan's colonial rule, but the fact that Korea's history overall was very peaceful, I think that itself is one good example of an outsider's perspective, a fresh angle of looking at Korean history.
You know, the core of that I like to argue is the surnames. There's so many Kims in Korea, 21%. So many E's, 15%.
Right.
So many Paks, 8.5%. Why? Why? Koreans don't answer that question for me, so I had to figure it out myself.
I've never asked that question myself.
You think it's natural.
Right.
Because you're a frog in the well. And there's so many other Kims, that's just natural, you know. And Han is not an unusual name, but there are a lot of people named Han. So, you know, Koreans tend to think that this surname situation is natural. It's not natural at all. It is very, very odd compared to other countries in the world. And the reason for it is Kim, E, and Pak are royal names. And in Korea, you didn't kill the royalty. When a dynasty fell, you didn't eliminate the royalty. In other countries, they did. But in Korea, they didn't. And that's the greatest symbol of Korea's peace is the dominance of Kims, E's, and Paks. And my hope is that as years go by, when someone new to Korea says, oh my, there's so many people named Kim. Why so many people named Kim? You say, that's a symbol of our peaceful history.
Oh, wow, this is so eye-opening and enlightening. I never thought of it that way. I never questioned anything about having so many Kims in Korea. And also quite a lot of the contents on your YouTube channel are focused on, are dedicated to discussing Confucianism. What is your key message that you want to send out regarding Confucianism?
My key message is that Confucianism in the last 300 years has married with patrilineal society, with male dominance, and it doesn't have to. For 1,200 years, or 1,200 years, Confucianism was in Korea when Korea was bilateral, or in other words, balanced between the genders. There was some patrilineality and some matrilineality. Both were operating. It's funny when I ask a Korean audience, before you were pugesahwe, patrilineal, what were you? And the average Korean audience says, oh, moge, matrilineal. A닙니다. That's not correct at all, because before patrilineality, it was bilateral, meaning balance between the males and the females. And so Confucianism made a mistake, if you can say it that way, by becoming patrilineal in the last 300 years. And now all they have to do is divorce patrilineality and be pure Confucianism. Pure Confucianism is wonderful. Hyo, filial piety to your parents. Chung, loyalty to the state. And then we say inui-yeji,
right.
Benevolence, justice, etiquette, and education. These are great values that Korea has for years taught their children. But now there's so many people that say, oh, I hate Confucianism. But what they hate is the patrilineal male dominance of Confucianism. You don't need to have that. Divorce that patrilineality and keep the pure Confucianism. And it's a wonderful set of teachings that make humans humans.
So there are great virtues of Confucianism that we need to carry on. Just take out the male dominance
part. Take out
part.
the male dominance, yeah.
Right. As a frog outside the well, you've been making significant contributions to promoting Korean history and also offering an outsider's perspective. In your view, what more needs to be done to further promote Korean history to the world, and why are these efforts important?
Well, I think it's a matter of understanding, correct understanding. And you know, a lot of people look at my YouTube channel and they say, oh, thank you for telling the world about our culture, which is what I'm trying to do. But I'm going to tell you a secret. 85% of my audience are Koreans. I'm really telling Koreans about Korean culture. And I want Koreans to think better of their culture. And if you think better of your history and your culture, it helps your self-esteem. When I first came to Korea, Korea was so poor. And the history was poor. It explained why Korea was poor. Now Korea is rich and prosperous and a great country. And the history needs to explain how it got to be so great. And the answer is within Confucianism and within the drive to education. You know, Koreans talk about the 교육열, the fever, the education fever. And they say, well, since the Korean War, since the division, no, education fever has gone back 1,000 years. Because for 1,000 years, you select people to serve in the government by how well they take an exam. The 과거제도, the examination system, goes back to early Koryo. So for 1,000 years, Koreans have looked at education as the center of success. And this is very different, for example, from the Japanese, where the center of success is the samurai, who uses his sword. But the Korean uses their pen or their brush. You know what we say about the pen and the sword? The pen is mightier than the sword. In Korea, the brush is mightier than the sword. And we've come up that way. Korea now is a divided country, but last year the World Bank announced that Korean per capita income is $35 ahead of Japan. So virtually tied. We've caught Japan. And Japan has been a unified country. We have been a divided country, yet we've caught up with Japan.
All right, our final question for you today. It'll mark 44 years since the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement this Friday. And from my understanding, you wrote a paper titled Americans and the Gwangju Movement back in 1987. And where you argued that the U.S. is partly responsible for neglecting the violent crackdown. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, I was able to put on the record interviews with Ambassador Gleistein, who was the ambassador at the time, and General Wickham, who was the four-star commander of the UN forces at that time. And they both, in my interview, denounced the military takeover. They denounced Chun Doo-hwan's abuse of democracy at that time. And so I was able to put them on record as saying so, whereas unfortunately the United States was dragged into the Gwangju incident, the Gwangju Democratic Movement, as looking like a bad guy, but they were really dragged in against their will and manipulated by the military government. So that's what I was able to put on the record in that article.
Well, we would love to sit here and hear more about your special stories, but I'm afraid that's all the time we've got. Thank you so much for the enlightening conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.